Hey, third graders. This is Miss Griffiths, and welcome to our last and my all-time favorite writing unit of third grade, Fairy Tale Adaptations, aka Fractured Fairy Tales. The purpose of this first video is just to help you guys understand exactly what fairy tale adaptations are in order to start preparing to write your own. Okay. The first thing I would like you to do is turn and talk with a family member or anyone who is nearby. You can pause the video after I ask the questions. What are fairy tales? Please discuss all you know about them, examples, etc. So please pause the video for a minute and have a good discussion, and then unpause to come back. Cool, I hope you guys had a fun talk. Looking at this anchor chart, fairy tales, which in many ways are similar to folk tales and fables, just like the fables we studied recently and wrote about. Here are some characteristics for many fairy tales. They're make-believe stories. Often they have some sort of magic in them. Maybe the animals are magic, there might be wands, fairies, spells. They often take place in a castle or some sort of kingdom long ago. They almost always begin once upon a time. They almost always end and they lived happily ever after. I'm sure you guys talked about that. Usually it's some sort of good versus evil in the story. Good guys are often princes, princesses, kings, queens, fairies, maybe peasants. Evil people are usually like a wicked queen or stepmother, witches, dragons, goblins, a wolf. Oops. And usually, just like the fables you guys studied recently, it teaches some sort of lesson. So, what are fairy tale adaptations? Hint, you might be thinking that the word adaptation means change. Here's our definition, and we're going to put this in our inquiry on our websites too this week. Adaptation in literature is when a writer takes a classic story and writes a different version of it. And we are going to be focusing on writing fairy tale adaptations, but you can adapt any type of literature, and it's really fun and exciting to read, and writers do it in all different ways. The inquiry for the session, the videos that we're going to work with first, studying how authors adapt fairy tales. Before we write our own, it's helpful to study and notice and name what authors do when they adapt. So here's our two questions. What does the author seem to be trying to do when he or she changes some things and not others? And how will studying someone else's adaptations help me when I write my own? So those are two things, students, that we would like you to have in mind as you start thinking about this. Before you can start adapting, it's vital that you know and remember the original, the classic fairy tale first. There's several ways you can do this. You can retell or recite the classic fairy tale with your family, which is fun. You can find it online to read and remind yourself. You can search like the classic Cinderella. Maybe you even have it in a picture book or a book of fairy tales at home, and it would be fun to revisit there. So I'm going to be working with, we're going to be working with Cinderella for our teacher modeling. You guys are going to be picking another fairy tale, anyone you want to do this work with. So the last part of this video is I'm going to try to very briefly retell the classic Cinderella, because I want to make sure I remember it really well before I start thinking about how I can adapt it. So you guys are going to do the same thing with whatever fairy tale you're thinking of working with. All right, here I go, the classic Cinderella. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Cinderella whose mom passed away, and her dad married this new woman who had two daughters of her own. The dad got very busy and he was like away all the time. So Cinderella was left with the stepmother and stepsisters, who turned out to be really, really wicked and cruel and mean to her. And they made her do all the cooking and cleaning and everything in the house. And Cinderella was sad. One day, the prince of the kingdom where they all lived was having a big, big ball to try to find a wife. And he invited every girl in the kingdom. And Cinderella really wanted to go, but the evil stepmother and stepsisters made her sew their dresses and do their hair and do everything to get ready. And they kind of made her feel like she could come too if she did all that. But then in the end, they tricked her and like still didn't let her come. And she was so sad, and she was crying. And suddenly her fairy godmother appeared, and she told Cinderella she was going to help her get to the ball. And she used her wand, and she made Cinderella's rags and clothes turn into a beautiful gown. She made a pumpkin turn into the carriage to get her there, and the animals turned into like her carriage men, and her shoes turned into these beautiful glass slippers. And Cinderella went to the ball, and she knew she had to be home by midnight, because at midnight everything would turn back to its regular selves. So the ball was happening, the prince and Cinderella danced, and they were having a really great time, and they were really into each other. And Cinderella suddenly noticed that it was like seconds to midnight, and she had to get home, or else it would be a pumpkin and she wouldn't even be able to get home. And she was so worried that the prince would see her rags and know who she really was. So she rushed away, and he was yelling, "What's your name? Wait!" And she was in such a rush, one of her shoes fell off and stayed on the steps, and the prince picked it up. And she made it home just in time as the clock struck midnight, but she was sad that everything went back to her rags and normal stuff. Then the prince, who still had the glass slipper, he cried out to all the land that he needed to find whoever's foot fit the slipper, because that was the girl that he loved, and that's who he wanted to be his wife. And so he was going all around the kingdom, having any girl try the slipper on. It didn't fit anyone's foot. Finally he was at Cinderella's house with the sisters, and both sisters tried their hardest to squeeze their feet into the glass slipper, and it wouldn't fit. And finally, at the last minute, Cinderella peeked out, or he noticed her, and the stepmother tried to not let her do it, but her foot went in and it fit perfectly. And he took Cinderella back to his castle, and they lived happily ever after. The end. Everyone, here's your task for session 1. You're going to be doing this on paper in your notebook, and you can make a chart just like mine. I would like you to watch at least one. You can watch all 3 if you'd like. I would like you to watch at least one Cinderella adaptation read aloud. Each one will be a video. In your notebook or on paper, make a chart like this, and use it to record what you noticed the adaptation author doing. So you're going to be jotting like a bulleted list for each one. What did the author change? Make a list. What did the author keep the same? Make a list. And then finally, what do you think the author's trying to do or say with this adaptation? What do you think they're trying to say? This is going to help you get ideas for planning your own adaptation in session 2 this week.